Hello everyone, this is the Arris X110 featuring 1106 4000 kV motors, Gym fan 2540 props, Runcam Swift camera, F4 flight controller with an OSD, 20 amp 4-in-1 ESC, 48 channel VTX, power switchable from bit mode all the way up to 200 milliwatts, XT30 for your battery connection. It weighs over 98.5 grams. Motor post to motor post, I am getting 110 millimeters. Bottom plate's 2.5 millimeters. An extra battery strap and Velcro. You get a metal bracket for your camera, a USB cable, and lastly you get a cable to use for your receiver. You'll notice the voltage down at the lower left. That is our 4S voltage. So this machine can and is capable of running 4S. In this particular case, I'm running a China Line Hobby 4S 450 milliamp battery. You'll also notice that I have the throttle value in the top left to give you some idea of how much throttle I am using while in flight. This sort of quad isn't necessarily designed to really go all that fast. You saw in the quick roll that we had that Runcam in there, and that will give us greater detail. Typically what we find in these sorts of machines are CMOS cameras that don't have a very good image, but in this case we have, it's an older generation, but it is still yet a better camera than we typically get in this hoop style configuration. We've seen a lot of these from King Kong in the past. So the hoops offer you some prop protection, and it also gives you some guidance as far as your training journey for something like this in FPV. The hoops themselves, I don't think those are going to last forever. And also in the kit, they do not include a set of screws that you can use to remount your motors without the hoops on there. So if you want to do that at a later time or from the get-go, you'll need to source those screws yourself. I did spend a fair bit of time tuning this, and I will put the PIDs on screen that I used for 4S and 3S. One of the things I spent a lot of time tuning, and we'll see it here when I do the punch over the house, is these machines don't do dives very well. You have an aerodynamic factor on these hoops that just don't, like right there, that wasn't the pilot. That pitched up on its own, and then I had to avoid that tree. That's something that happens, and we've seen this a number of times. But it's something to be familiar with. Is that you're going to have to fly around the limitations of having those hoops on there. I would say that if you've got something like this and you've started to become pretty comfortable with it, to go ahead and take the hoops off. That way you can experience different sorts of flight maneuvers, and you won't have that kind of out of control feeling, because it is fairly disconcerting when you're on the sticks, especially when it happens the first few times, because it just doesn't respond very well to what you do. The main thing that I did was kind of, I held the right stick kind of in place and waited for something to happen and would decrease my throttle. That way if I did come down and I was going to go into something, I wouldn't get tangled up and possibly injure the vehicle any worse with spinning props at a higher RPM. I'm going to show the 3S flight when we get back to the bench. I'll put that on the screen in a smaller box. The flight time's pretty good, of course, with 4000 kV. We've got a fairly efficient setup. It is a little bit of a heavier vehicle, but that's to be expected in these sorts of configurations. We've got a lot more plastic type materials used in the vehicle, and that stuff isn't necessarily good to keep our weight down, especially in micros. There's also a few more things to show you about the mounting of the top plate, and you can see we come into land, we're right at 3.52 volts, so we're in good shape as far as our voltage goes. So a couple of things we've seen on the channel, the King Kong ET series, and this is a different hoop design. It's a different material. They don't tout this as being indestructible. It is purely a prop guard. I did bump into a few things. I didn't have any dramatic crashes, but when I would come in from those dives that I was trying to sort out, I did get tangled up in a few trees. Those were probably the most dramatic crashes that I had. I'll go ahead and start that 3S flight right up there. That flight is quite a bit longer. That comes in at over 4 minutes on the stock battery, the 550 milliamp battery that they include in the kit. I believe this battery is probably, the manufacturer is likely Infinity, which is a good battery, so I'm glad to see that. Of the many that come in this configuration, this is the only one that I'm aware of that comes with a CCD camera, typically with the CMOS, and I know I mentioned that, but that's really the one differentiating feature of this one versus some of the others that we've seen on the channel. Smart audio with power switchable VTX would be the other one. We don't oftentimes see that. Typically, it's very manual, but you know, squeezing these hoops a little bit, they don't feel fragile, but I can't imagine that they would survive every sort of crash. You can see I've got plenty of grass and whatnot stuck on the inside of mine. Also note while we're looking at this view that it is set up to rotate props out so that the rotation goes in towards the sides, and that is a good stabilizing feature when it comes to these hoop style of quadcopters, that they do kind of need that. That does help create some additional stability in flight. It will minimize some of the factor when you're coming in from a dive where you've got these hoops kind of act like a wing to a certain degree. So you've got one sort of wing down here, you've got another sort of wing down there, and you're coming down, and you really have to fly around that limit. If you're wanting to do building dives and stuff like that, it's going to be especially difficult. Now, I have read that there is an opportunity possibly with tweaking out BL Heli that we can mitigate some of that yaw, washout, or sudden pitching that we do get when we do those maneuvers. I didn't tinker with that a whole lot, but it is something that we can explore in the future. Also, I did show this in another video when I kind of introduced this machine, but you see we have soft mounting all through there. Hopefully I can get enough light. You can see all those rubber grommets in there for soft mounting, and it's extremely soft. My concern with that is how secure is the canopy going to stay on. I had some difficulties with the top 4 screws that hold the canopy assembly on the stack coming off. I'm quite certain it wasn't through vibration because they are nylon. So my concern is that this might snap if you take a direct hit to the canopy. Say you're flying under something and you whack the canopy on it, that you may end up snapping those standoffs. Now, nylon kits are cheap. You can get an entire kit, for $6, $7, $8, and then you can get yourself back up in the air. But do be aware, if you have one of these machines, don't try to squeeze this down, because you could get those components touching one another, and you don't want that, because of course that will cause a short, and then you have a problem and some sadness on your hands. I did mention that we have camera angle that we can get, but there isn't a lot. You're not going to get extreme camera angle. I've got it up just about as far as I could. I actually I held it with a screwdriver up, and then I screwed it, but unfortunately I chose the screw that moved it down slightly when I was screwing it in. So it's a few degrees off of maximum camera angle, and you can still see the front prop guards when you're in flight and view. Some people will want that, some people won't. That's really a choice that you have to make on your own. I do wish that we had some sort of tape or heat shrink holding down the wires, but they're not long enough to where they're going to get up in the props. It's just something that if you get into a tree, you can get a little tree branch between there, and that's going to make getting it out of the tree that much more difficult. But I would say stay away from trees with this for the most part, because with all these spaces for tree branches to go through, if you do get hung up in a tree, that is going to be quite a challenge to get back out. This thing is going to act like a multi-grappling hook and just grab every branch and get hung up. So avoid trees with things like this. I thought the video reception was pretty good. I was flying with a VTX set to 200 milliwatt. The motors aren't especially noisy. There's nothing that really stood out about the motors. You know, this isn't a high performance machine. This is more of an entry level or a training sort of machine that you can use to get used to. Maybe you want to start flying acro mode. Maybe you've been flying hoops indoors, brushed hoops, and you want to start to explore outdoor more, but you're a little bit uncomfortable in going in something that doesn't have prop protection. This coming in at $129 also helps with the pocketbook. I think that's a pretty reasonable price for something like this with the CCD camera, smart audio, 200 milliwatt. You've got 3 and 4S capable motors. You can run 3S when you're getting started. It's a little less aggressive, and hopefully the difference in the videos you've been able to tell that. Also, the 3S batteries are going to be less expensive, so if budget is an issue, that's something else that you can take advantage of. It's just that the flight is going to be more mild on 3S than it will be on 4S, but that should be very expected. I would say if you have this and you have any troubles with the extreme vibration dampening, I would disassemble it, take your nylon kit, and build it up fairly traditionally, and just use rubber grommets around the flight controller on the top and the bottom, and that should help create some additional stability and possibly also give it some additional rigidity if you have troubles with hitting the canopy off of something and snapping those nylon screws in there. You can see I've whacked a few things up here on the top. I've smudged the the Arris logo a little bit that's painted on there. So it has taken some abuse in my hands, but I won't claim that it's taken an extreme abuse. And the last thing I'll show you is that you can get the USB cable in. I'm not going to use the stock one. The stock one's about the same size. It's very, very close. If that's the ends, probably can't tell through that packaging, but they're very, very close in size, if not identical. But the USB port's right there on the side, and you can get this in without taking the hoops off. I've seen that before to where you couldn't. Hopefully I can keep my hand out of the way while I do this, but hopefully you see the light in there. And we've got that weak beeping. Sorry, I gotta unplug that. So you can get the USB cable in without taking off the hoops. That's something that always annoyed me about certain configurations, when you couldn't get a USB cable in there and you had to get like a right angle adapter for your micro USB in order to be able to plug it in to change anything. Typically with our OSD and the VTX being adjustable right from within the goggles, that you shouldn't have to adjust it much. Just after that initial setup of setting your OSD features where you want them on screen, where you're used to them or where you like them. Maybe you want to set your font, your switch modes, your binding, set your rates, and then you should be able to control everything else through the OSD. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, otherwise about this vehicle, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.